to Achieving Success with Olivia Akin. I'm your host, Olivia Akin. Each week, we will discuss the roadmap of achieving your personal and professional success. We give you real-life stories on growing personally and professionally to achieve your life and career goals with the help of some top-notch guests. Today, we are speaking with Matthew Cossolotto. Matthew is known as the Podium Pro and is an award-winning author, speaker, and former speechwriter for senior executives at global companies like PepsiCo and MasterCard, as well as for members of the U.S. Congress and NATO officials. With a mission to empower others to become more authentic, compelling, and confident speakers, Matthew shares powerful tools to help people go from stage fright to stage delight. His book, The Joy of Public Speaking, recently won the 2024 Manoncrest Media Book Award in Business Communications and PR. Through his coaching and personal empowerment programs, Matthew helps audiences tap into their full potential by transforming habits and unlocking the power of promise. You can find Matthew by going to his website MatthewCossolotto.com, or by emailing him at matthew.cossolotto@gmail.com. Hello, Matthew. It's fantastic having you on the show.
Hi, Olivia. Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
To start off the show, can you tell me what success means and looks like to Matthew Cossolotto?
Well, I knew you were going to ask it because I've seen your show before. And here's what I think. I think it's happiness. I don't think there's any success without happiness. And I have a unique definition of happiness. So I'll share that with you. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, President Kennedy, was asked once at a press conference if he enjoyed being president. And he said he did. And he defined enjoyment or happiness. He said it's the Greek definition of happiness, which is the full use of your powers along lines of excellence. And I think that's really what it's all about, the full use of your powers along lines of excellence. So that's what happiness is. That's what success is to me, being able to use my powers to the fullest, peak potential.
So that being said, I can't move on without asking you, what does it look like to use your powers to the full abilities of them to make you happy and fulfilled?
I think it has to do with what we're doing right now, talking about these topics and spreading the word. In fact, I just launched a campaign to spread the joy, a campaign to spread the joy about public speaking. That's the title of my book. But there are other aspects, and we'll get into them, I think, other areas of personal empowerment that I believe very strongly in. And I have a great time talking about and letting people know there are things that they can do to empower themselves. And that's what I'm all about.
And you just brought up empowering yourself. And I brought up in the description of introducing you as well, the power of promise. So Matthew, you often speak about transformational power of making a heartfelt promise, and that is where it sits, especially one made to yourself or someone you love. Can you share a moment when a personal promise became a catalyst for real change in your life, and how that experience shaped your approach to leadership as well as public speaking and what you're doing now?
Well, that's a big area, big topic, but I can tell you exactly the promise that I made that changed my life. I made a promise to my mother on her deathbed that I would finish writing a book that she had been encouraging me to write over a period of a couple of years. I told her a little bit about this book, and she kept calling me and asking me, how's the book coming? And you know how mothers can be, kind of nagging me a little bit about it. And I said, I don't know if I'm going to write that book or not. I'm not real sure I'm a personal empowerment writer. But that was the book it was about. I can tell you about the book. But eventually, when she got sick, she had cancer, and I knew it would be the last time I talked to her. I told her, look, Mom, I want to make you a promise. I want to promise you that I will finish writing that book that you've been encouraging me to write, and I'll dedicate it to your memory. And tears welled up in both her eyes. And she said, do you do that, Matthew? She's shaking her finger. You do that. This makes me very happy, she said. And that was great for me to be able to bring her that kind of happiness. But I knew failure was not an option. I made that promise, a heartfelt promise. I had to write that book. And it turned out a couple of years went by. I was trying to figure out how to do it. And I wrote a book called Habit Force, and I'll tell you more about that. I'm updating that book now, but that book launched me on this path toward being an author, self-help, personal empowerment author, and a speaker on these topics. So I attribute all of that to the promise I made to my mother, and the book I mentioned and you mentioned earlier, The Joy of Public Speaking, also grew out of that promise because it's all part of this whole wonderful adventure I'm on, writing books and talking about different topics. And another one is about the power of making a promise. That's another book in the trilogy I have. So we can talk more about all that, but that was a life-changing promise.
That's incredibly powerful. How do you guide others, whether it's leaders, speakers, or everyday professionals, to identify and anchor themselves in a meaningful promise that can fuel the growth and resilience in high pressure situations?
Well, a promise, here's the thing. I think a promise is not well understood, although people make promises all the time. In fact, the book that I'm pulling together called The Harness Your Promise Power, that book includes a lot of promise stories from famous people and not so famous people. So one of the things I try to do is provide examples, stories. I call them promise stories, so that people can be inspired by promises that other people made. One example, I guess, I'll use Tony Robbins, a well-known name in this field. Tony Robbins, when he was a young, uh, kind of a kid still, his family didn't have a lot of money. They didn't get Thanksgiving dinner because they didn't have money. And some charity provided Thanksgiving dinners for them. And so he made a promise to himself when he was, I think, 16 or maybe 15, that someday he would be able to provide Thanksgiving dinners to more and more people. And that compelled him or propelled him into this whole area of charitable giving. And he provides Thanksgiving dinners to millions of people over the years. He's been doing that. So that was a personal empowerment promise that he made. And I encourage people to make those sorts of promises. I call them personal empowerment promises because it's about, like I did, about writing a book or you be, you know, creating a charity. Those sorts of things are empowering. And I think you should turn goals. This is my formula, really. Turn important goals into heartfelt promises, and you're much more likely to follow through. So a promise, I think, is more powerful than a goal because it comes from the heart. Goals are
I love that. And
cerebral.
it's something too where, like you identified there, that it's not just about goal setting and following goals and setting goals, right? And there is that aspect. And it's not just about making a promise to others, but identifying whether to make the promise to others and or just yourself. And sometimes all you have to do is identify that promise for yourself and lean into it. And it is something that can take a while to accomplish, like you've mentioned with your book and making that promise to your mother, Tony Robbins, and doing holiday meals every year. Like he wasn't able to switch, the light on or flick his fingers and say, okay, now we're going to serve all these people every year because there's things that go into that. But you get to that point. And one thing you also brought up is fear and all these other aspects. And that being said, in your book, The Joy of Public Speaking, you talk about turning fear into joy. How does making a personal promise intersect with overcoming stage fright? And what roles does that inner commitment play in transforming someone's presence on stage as well as in leadership roles?
Well, I think that making a promise is so powerful. I think of promise making as the new frontier in personal change and development because people make promises, but they don't think of it in terms of personal empowerment. And so if you make a promise to yourself to get better at public speaking or to find the joy in public speaking, that's going to compel you much more than if you just set a goal. So some people make New Year's resolutions, and I always suggest to people, turn your resolution into a promise, and you're much more likely to follow through. Because promises, I said is earlier, they're heartfelt, and we know from childhood. We have the nursery rhyme, or what we always say that a promise, as you say, cross my heart and hope to die, stick a needle in my eye. That's a little rhyme that we remember as kids. That's serious business. You know from childhood that a promise is a promise. In fact, those are the opening words in the foreword that Jack Canfield wrote for my book. Jack Canfield of the Chicken Soup for the Soul fame and other books, but that particular series of books, he sold like 500 million copies. But he knows. In fact, he talks in his foreword about a promise he made when he was 27 years old. He made a promise to God. That's another, in the book, I talk about the anatomy of promises. And it can be a promise to yourself, it can be a promise to someone you care about, or possibly a deity or God. Jack Canfield made a promise to God. And that's a very powerful promise. And his promise, I don't want to give it away, but basically was to kind of propel himself in the area of empowering others, kind of like the promise that I've talked about.
In shifting gears into technique, one of the standout tools you teach is the 6-point checklist for powerful presentations. Can you walk us through that framework and share how each element contributes to delivering a message that truly resonates with the audience?
Yeah, I love this 6-point checklist. It's the power of speech. So this checklist spells out the word speech. So I like when I do speeches or write books or something, I like to make it memorable and easily remembered. So the power of speech is really an acronym or an acrostic in which each letter spells out something important in a speech. And at the time, this is one of the first things I did as a coach, a speech coach. I came up with the power of speech. And I thought there are a lot of books, a lot of recommendations, a lot of details, a lot of pointers, and people can get confused. So I came up with the 6 points. And I said, if people can remember these 6 things, spell out the word speech, their speeches are going to be much more powerful, much more effective. And so I'll walk you through it and just touch on each one a little bit. So each letter stands for an important recommendation or something you should do as a speaker. The S in speech stands for strong start. And people probably realize they should start strong. That sounds great. And one of the things I recommend is don't open with pleasantries like, oh, it's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank Bob and Susan for inviting me. That's very important real estate in the speech, right at the beginning. So it's much better to open with something powerful that might surprise the audience. Maybe it's a one word or a statistic. I recommend a personal story. I often start a talk with my promise story. I made a promise to my mother on her deathbed. People remember personal stories. And so if you want to start a speech off in a strong way, think of something different than just these usual sort of inanities that people start with. Just, thank you I appreciate being here, blah, blah, blah. That's not the good way to start. So you want to start strong and be memorable and be passionate at the beginning. A personal story is one of the best things to do. That's the S. I think we have enough time for me to go through so the P in speech stands for something that people don't do enough of. Pausing for effect and drama. I think it was Mark Twain who said something like, the right word is really powerful, but even more powerful is a rightly placed or rightly timed pause. So if you pause and you take a breath and you let the audience sort of catch up with you, and you pause before you say something kind of dramatic or surprising, or afterwards, let it sink in. And here's something that speakers don't do enough of. Enjoy the silence a little bit. Play around with a little bit of silence. Pausing is very powerful. One of the things I've noticed, when you pause, when the speaker pauses, people listen. The audience listens. They pay attention because they're wondering, why is he being quiet? What's coming next? It's intriguing to the audience. So silence is your friend. Not too much, but some well-timed pauses are very important. So pause for effect and drama. So the first E in speech is eye contact. Eye contact. And, that's really important because you have to look at people when you talk to them. Look people in the eye, one person at a time. You can go around the audience, take a look. And I'm sort of trying to indicate here, I'm looking around the audience, right? Now, but I look into the camera, I'm looking right into somebody's eye. So eye contact is really important. A lot of speakers look down, and there's a tip that I like to give. You don't say any word at all. You don't say anything when you're looking down. You might have notes, but you're quiet when you look down, and you look up and you talk to somebody in the audience, and that's when you say something. So you look down and then you look up, and you might be reading your speech. You might be reading every word. Just don't say anything when you're looking down. So eye contact, really important when you're trying to make a connection with members of the audience. And the other little thing I'll say about this, when you're in connection with members of the audience, other people notice it. And that's also another way for people to pay attention, because they don't know when you're going to come over and look at them, and make eye contact with them. So if you're always in connection with somebody, the audience pays more attention to you. So really important, eye contact. The second E, should I just keep rolling like this?
Yeah.
The second E is enthusiasm and energy. It's kind of a double whammy there. If you're not enthusiastic about your topic, your audience is not going to give a darn either. They're going to say, well, why is this person boring? If they're not enjoying this, be enthusiastic, be passionate, have some energy. So that's really important when you're giving a talk. Have some energy, be enthusiastic. There's an old line, it's not so much about giving speeches, but I like the line. An employer might say, if you're not fired with enthusiasm, you'll be fired with enthusiasm. So, you don't want to be fired. You want to have some enthusiasm when you're a speaker. So the C in speech is conversational style, or have a conversational tone. Don't use big words. If a small word would work, use everyday words. One speech coach I admire a lot, Granville Toogood, is also an author. He talks about being talky. So be talky, be conversational. So if you get too highfalutin, if you use big words trying to impress the audience, audiences can tell that's kind of phony. So you don't have to do that. Use small words, use everyday words, be talky. And the H in speech, I think, is really critical. Have a little bit of humor. If you have a good joke, yeah, people say open with a joke. I'm not sure, but don't use a canned joke. Don't use three guys walked into a bar or something. You gotta be careful with humor. But here's one way to use humor I like to use. For instance, you can talk about, let's say, a cartoon. I saw a New Yorker cartoon that relates to sort of what I'm doing here. A New Yorker cartoon, I'll describe it. It's a little stick figure, person on I think a New York corner, and there's a street vendor. The street vendor has a sign and sort of big eyes looking at the person, the customer. And this person's on the street, looks at him, and the sign says, eye contact, $1. So this eye contact, it's priceless, really. But if you want eye contact in New York, you might have to pay $1 for it if you're on the street. But it's just a way, if you can put the cartoon up on a slide, you can actually do that, or you can describe it, and you can inject a little bit of lightness, a little bit of humor in your every talk should have. And sometimes it's just found humor, something that you just think of in that moment. But again, humor, you have to be careful. But I think having some humor, enjoying what you're doing up there makes a big difference. So those are the 6 things: strong start, pausing, eye contact, enthusiasm, conversational style or tone, and inject a little bit of humor, because a speech is part entertainment and part information transfer.
Well, and you just went over those 6 points, and even listening to you, I'm like going through past talks I've done, and I'm like, okay, where are we hitting, right?
Yeah.
Or when I'm doing different things, are you hitting that checklist? I think it's really powerful in public speaking, whether that's a boardroom or a conference full of people. These are all tools that could be implemented. And that being said, you just went over those 6 point checklists that I think we should all always have in our back pocket now. And so that covers during the speech. What are some of your daily or presentation rituals you recommend to help speakers get into a confident, focused mindset before they even step on that stage?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because the power of speech is what I call, it's kind of 2 things. It's a little bit of inside game, like eye contact. It's not really about the structure of the speech. It has a little bit of element of performance, conversational tone, those sorts of things, energy, some performance aspects. So it's power of speech is both. But I think it's really important. That's why my book is called The Joy of Public Speaking. There's an inside game that you want to prepare your mindset to be joyful, in effect. And I have 7 steps to joy. I won't go through all of them, but I do think remembering 1 or 2 of these before you get on the stage is really important. And just have a joyful mindset about it. Be very positive. Have positive, not negative view. Even words matter. Really important. Words do matter, Olivia. If you say that and you hear this all the time, I have to go give a speech, I have to go give a presentation, like it's a negative, right? I encourage people to say, I get to go give a talk. Just be enthusiastic about it. Don't be phony, but you have an opportunity when you're in front of an audience to possibly change their lives. One idea, one thought can change their lives, depending on what you're talking about, or you're just informing them or whatever. But if you're in the business I'm in, you really want to take that opportunity and be enthusiastic about it, as we talked about before. But so prepare yourself mentally. And the 7 steps to joy, one of the things that one of the 7 steps, and I'll mention this because I think it's critically important. Remind yourself, this is like the 6th step. It's not really in the order of importance or anything, but number 6 is the audience supports you. It's like a mantra. Tell yourself that. Remind yourself. And I do that all the time. The audience supports me. The audience supports the speaker. And that puts you in the right frame of mind. And if you have a negative view, and I always tell people, if you might doubt that. You might say, well, what if they're hostile? I say, well, what is that your problem? You don't want to be thinking that they're hostile. You want to be thinking they support you. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the audience supports you. Have that that mindset. So these are mindset shifts. And I talk about the gentle art of mental joy jitsu. These are joy jitsu moves. Shift your mindset to joyful things, to positive things. And you can do that through the 7 steps to joy. I've only mentioned one of them. Or you can even go into what I call a speaking sanctuary. In a minute or less, you can go in a meditative state before you speak. You can actually think, again, positive thoughts. Close your eyes, as I'm doing now. You can think that you're going to nail the opening. You know the opening story. you kind of rehearse that a little bit. You can rehearse audience applause. You can hear that in your mind. So get yourself in a nice positive frame of mind and banish any negative thoughts before you get up and speak.
And that being said, looking at your journey and that positive jiu-jitsu that you do, how do you implement that and make sure you're implementing it, even during your busy schedule when you might be going from one thing to the next?
Well, you want to know the material real well, that's for sure. So you need to do your homework. Yeah, it's not a good idea to just wing it. You go out and wing it. Some comedians are able to do that. But if you're a speaker and you have certain subjects and topics and ways of talking about things, so you work on the material. You know the material well, so you feel confident about the material. I think that's an important part of it. And I've talked with people who feel the same way. A friend of mine just said that when he gave a eulogy for his father at his funeral, and he felt confident about that and he felt good about it, but he knew the material real well. That's one of the reasons I really like opening with a personal story, because it's a personal story. You don't need to remember you don't need to think about it. You don't need to write it out, and you should not write it out and read it. You should know the story. And so you can spend the first minute or two or three being real confident about this personal story and what it means to you and to your audience and the subject, why that should be important to them, why it relates to your topic. So a personal story is a great way to start because it makes you feel confident as you get into the material.
Looking back at your journey from working behind the scenes with leaders and CEOs to standing front and center as the Podium Pro, what legacy do you hope to leave behind through your work? And what's one promise you hope every person makes to themselves before they step onto their own podium in life?
Wow, I really like the idea. I don't know that I think about legacy too much, but I do like the idea of being known, first of all, as the Podium Pro. I kind of like that as the title. But uh, this personal empowerment topic, I like the idea of owning some aspects of it, and promise power in particular. Nobody else has really owned that, and I think that it's a new frontier in personal empowerment, the power of making a promise. So I'd like to be known for that. I'd like to leave that uh, behind as kind of a legacy, and that's part of the trilogy of books I mentioned, the Joy of Public Speaking, Harness Your Habit Force, which is the updated title, and Harness Your Promise Power. I use harness in both of them, so they're kind of a companion. These are companion books, but I think the idea of a promise power and all of these personal empowerment ideas, I'd like to leave behind a legacy of helping to empower millions of people, if possible, so that they can achieve their goals, their dreams, and achieve their peak potential, reach their peak potential.
Matthew, how can people get in touch with you if they want to connect with you?
Well, I'd love for them to get in touch through my website. I think you have a link, Matthew, just my name, MatthewCossolotto.com. LinkedIn is a good way. They can find me on LinkedIn. They can email me. Hopefully they'll get in touch. I've launched this campaign to spread the joy of public speaking. So I am looking like for, opportunities, venues, gigs, coaching, all of that. So if anybody has any thoughts about that and podcasts like this, I really appreciate Olivia, you having me on as a guest. It's a pleasure for me to spread the word a little bit, spread the joy.
Of course. And I've enjoyed our conversation about promises and speaking and the joy of public speaking. There's so many things that go into it that tie together, not just in those areas of personal development and in public and professional settings, but also how it could spill into even other areas of our life. Thank you, Matthew, for all of your insight today.
Thank you. Has it already been 2 hours? No.
And a few more key takeaways from today's conversation includes there is power of you're having a promise. So there's power in that promise, and power you have when you make that promise to yourself or to others. And this is really what Matthew touched upon, not just in the beginning, but throughout, is we have power in that, and really being able to understand that as well as leverage it, as well as turn important goals into personal promises. I think this is so key because even take the beginning of the new year. What do so many people do? Set a goal and say, I'm going to do this. As Matthew said, turn that goal though into a personal promise instead of I'm going to do XYZ and even making it a SMART goal. Say, I promise myself I'm going to lose 10 pounds. I'm going to lose 25 pounds, whatever that might be. I promise myself I will get on one stage this year. I promise myself I will present a PowerPoint presentation in my class if I don't like speaking, whatever it might be, but turn that goal into a promise, as well as when Matthew brought up, like, reiterate it to yourself before you get on that stage in front of that group, the positivity as well. A promise equals personal empowerment. I think that is such a strong takeaway that we should all really be leveraging and understanding, is that we hold power, and what that power looks like is personal empowerment. And then the 6-point checklist that Matthew went over, that I'm challenging everyone to write down and use next time they're getting ready to write that presentation, that speech, get on a stage, whatever it might be, get in front of your class to give a presentation, is S equals strong start, P equals pause, E equals eye contact, E also then equals in being enthusiastic and your energy. The C is conversational style and tone. And then H, have humor in it. This was a great episode with our top-notch guest, Matthew Cossolotto. Thank you for listening and have a successful day.